This is Pick One, Pack One, everything you need to start your draft off right. I'm one of your hosts, Paul, here with my co-host, Gavin McKay.
Hi, I'm Gavin McKay, and today's episode is playing sealed at the RCQ level. Paul, what is an RCQ?
Gavin, an RCQ is a Regional Championship Qualifier. It's a sanctioned event that qualifies the winner or winners for the Regional Championship. Players who do well at a Regional Championship qualify for the Pro Tour. So in many ways, the RCQ can be seen as the gateway to high-level competitive Magic.
Right. So you want to do well at these events. It gives you the chance to kind of show your stuff as a Magic player, and sealed events are definitely one of the more crazy ones.
Absolutely.
Before we talk about the RCQs and everything else that comes along with them, we want to do a recurring segment we call Cool Deck of the Week. This time on Cool Deck of the Week, we have not one, but two decks to showcase from myself. Just before Christmas, Paul and I had the pleasure of playing at our favorite tabletop gaming store. We played at Tabletop Gaming in Newington, Connecticut. It's our home-based store, and we
Not
had
a sponsor.
Great time. Not a sponsor.
Not a sponsor, just our favorite place to play Magic in Connecticut.
That's right, yeah. And they've been our home for limited Magic, as well as standard Commander games, and we were stoked to do this sealed RCQ that was on top of their regularly scheduled constructed events. So thanks to the holidays, there were 41 players from as far as New York and Los Angeles who turned up to do 6 rounds of sealed and a top 8 draft for one of 2 tickets to the upcoming Regional Championship in Hartford or Minneapolis. So how did we do?
I lost my winning in. I ended up 10th, but Gavin, you made top 8. Congratulations.
Yes.
This was your first limited RCQ?
It was, yeah. So I was very nervous going into the event and certainly was not expecting this result. Coming into it, I had only heard of RCQs. I'd never participated in one before, so I was very nervous. I didn't know all the ins and outs that come along with an event of this caliber.
So
that being said,
what was your expectation for the day? Because that's something we'd like to tease the rest of the episode with.
Yeah, so my greatest hope for this event was to finish in the top half. There were so many players, so many good players, and sealed is a very crazy format. Depending on the pool that you open can change everything about your deck, and there's a lot of variance. So it being my first one and the amount of preparation I had done for it, I thought with the amount of players that were there, I think coming top half would be a admirable goal and something I very much was trying for and really wanted to see if I could get there. And I exceeded those expectations far and away, really.
Yeah. Congrats again. This is fantastic. I want to delve into your preparation when we get into the main gist of what we're going to talk about today. But before we get into kind of the nuts and bolts there, I want to look at your decks. Let's talk about your decks. These are the decks of the week. So let's start with your sealed deck. And kind of talk us to how you ended up with the configuration that you have here.
So you can see that...
Can you zoom it in just a hair?
Absolutely, yes. Let me see here. So here we have my RCQ deck. I don't know if I can zoom in any further, unfortunately.
Highlight everything that you're talking about while you're talking about it. It was perfect.
Yep, you got it. So I ended up in a blue-green deck. The color pairing is as we discussed in our last episode, not usually a very good one. In fact, it was ranked last. Is that right? It was ranked last.
Was at the very bottom, if not the very bottom.
Mm-hmm.
But I am noticing 2 key cards that we talked about as reasons to be in the color pair. So
that's right.
Talk about...
So the card that really carried me today was Zimone Paradox Sculptor.
Okay.
What I was able to do with it is get it down sometimes on turn 4, but most often it was on turn 5 or turn 6 when I was able to either protect it or bait out a removal spell from my opponent before I actually played it, or hold up, some kind of counter magic. I don't actually have any refutes, so that was one weakness in my deck.
You have the single copy?
I had one copy of Refute. So being able to hold up, 7 mana at any one time was pretty tricky. But being able to fade a removal spell and actually resolve Simone and have her stick around for any amount of time basically won me the game. I actually did this as a very late pivot, this blue-green deck as a very late pivot, because in my sideboard, in my pack, I actually had Celestial Armor, Feldar Savior, Luminous Rebuke, Sarah Angel, Cat Collector, Sky Knight Squire. These are all great reasons to be in the white color pairing, and it's possible that I should have been in a Selesnya green-white deck or something else, but in the end, the blue really did end up saving my butt. The Strix Lookout was another MVP for me because not only does it take counters very well, Zimone produces those counters that you can put on to the Strix Lookout every single turn, but it also helped me loot away any additional lands that I ended up having. The other MVP that I had was Tatiova Benthic Druid. I basically went with a more synergistic deck over pure power level, or even the fact that I had, bombs. I basically played my best cards, or what I thought was my best cards. And they just synergized really well together and got the job done. There were more than one occasion where it was a board stall, board state that wasn't going anywhere, and then I looted or drew into my copy of Overrun and basically ended the game on the spot.
Absolutely.
It can't be overstated how important these Gnarlid colonies, which make things with 1/1 counters on them, have trample. These Beaskin Rangers, which have trample naturally, and the Eager Truffle Snout, which makes food and also has trample. That was really very important in busting through the opponent's defenses and basically, winning the day.
Gavin, I'm seeing some fixing in your main deck that you chose to run here.
Mm-hmm.
Was there ever a period where you were thinking about going 3 colors and playing your white as part of this pile?
Yeah, there was a thought. The thing about an RCQ, though, is you have 30 minutes to put this all together. So there's a very, very significant time crunch. And if you haven't prepped or planned, as I didn't really plan or prep for the actual time limitations that you have, there is a world where I could have splashed this, but another aspect that we'll get into later as well is you have to start your deck the same every single time. And so I felt like if I started with a 3-color deck, given that, I would have basically, limited fixing with this Evolving Wilds, and maybe the Campus Guide. I didn't really think that I had the chance to pivot out of it if it was a bad matchup, or I just wanted to go with something that I know I could trust and have 2 colors, draw my colors every time. I never got mana screwed, and when I did get flooded, I had ways of mitigating that, with the Think Twice, the Fleeting Distraction, the Strix Lookout, the Tatiova that draws cards. There are ways around it, and I actually almost ran 18 lands just because in the late game, Tatiova can sometimes draw you, a bunch of cards, and lands are actually not dead cards later on in the game.
Right.
The card
see you
that
also
I
have
was
the Elfsworn Giant in there, so that's another
exactly
reason to be running
that
the
is another
extra
reason
lands.
to have the extra lands. Exactly. Yeah. So the
Very
Micromancer
cool.
was by far my weakest card because it only had the 1 hit, the Fleeting Distraction. If I could go back and change one card out, it would be Micromancer with the card that I most often sideboarded in, which was Imprisoned in the Moon, which is a very bad removal spell. It basically turns your opponent's creature into ramp. So if you play it on turn 3, I'll bring up Imprisoned in the Moon here just so we can see it. Hold on a second. So Imprisoned in the Moon basically turns whatever creature you attach it to into a colorless land. I ended up sideboarding that in against pretty much all of my round 2 and beyond opponents because they had some bomb that I had to deal with, and turning it into a land is almost better than killing it because there's some graveyard recursion, some graveyard nonsense that you had to deal with. So this actually ended up being a much better card in most matchups than the Micromancer, which was oftentimes just a 3/3 for 4. So it was just a body. So I ended up sideboarding that out the
Okay.
majority of the time.
So you made top 8. You sit down to draft. What was your expectation going into a top 8 draft in your first
Yeah.
RCQ? What was going
That's
through
a
your
great
mind?
question. So the expectation, I had already exceeded it. I already made top 8 and I was flying high. My expectation was basically just try and draft a good deck and then let the cards fall where they may.
Okay.
And I did end up going out in the first round of the top 8. But I'm going to show you the deck that I did end up building. So I ended up with a Dimir deck, which again we said was the best color combination.
I believe it was up there. I believe the secret
Gruul was the
sauce
number
is
one, but it
Gruul.
was in the top 3. So I did end up drafting this deck. What drew me into Dimir was this pick one, pack one Dreadwing Scavenger. Going back, I shouldn't have gotten so locked into this color combination because I feel like I ended up with a pretty mediocre deck. I didn't really get all the pieces that I would be looking for in this type of deck. You can see there are no refutes here. You can see that there's a lot of card draw, but not a lot going on. You know, I mean, the mischievous mystic would have had to basically carry my game plan the whole time, and I just didn't. It just didn't end up working out. I found that a lot of times the opponent got off to a faster start than me. You can see that I have quite a few, top end cards here. The High Society Hunter being the best one of the bunch that I actually got in pack 3. Somebody passed it to me like pack number 4. So obviously black was open, but I just didn't end up seeing any of the signpost black cards that I would want, like the Bakes into the Pies, the Stabs, the things that would really make me into a really good blue-black deck. In fact, I probably should have been some sort of blue-white deck. Okay. I feel like that would have been a lot stronger. I did see an Empyrean Eagle pretty early on in the draft, and I could have gone in that direction because I did see some Dazzling Angels afterwards and some other very good white cards. But I had already committed to this blue-black Dimir deck and didn't end up with the best deck because of it. My opponent played an Alenda on turn 4 in both games, and it was kind of curtains for me after that. The fact that it has protection from instants is kind of gross. Yeah, it's kind of gross. All in all, I'm very happy with my performance. I'm very pleased. I would do another one again, in a heartbeat,
and we will. They're on the schedule. We're targeting them. We'll be Aether drifting our way in.
Yes. Honestly, Aetherize, I learned a very interesting interaction with Aetherize that could have helped me in the matchup. I did not realize that because this does not target, it can affect the entire board, and Alenda is not immune from it.
Yes.
When in doubt, call a judge, ask them to, help you with that type of interaction. But that is one of those things where, my relative inexperience at RCQs mixed with the amount of time that it takes to do these events and also the mental and physical load that you're taking on when you're doing an event like this just added up in the end. And while I'm disappointed that I didn't come in higher after the top 8 because I feel like I'm a pretty good drafter, I'm not disappointed with the fact that this was my first one, and I'm proud of what both of us were able to do. I mean, top 10, you were just a hair whisker outside that top 8, really.
Yeah, I lost the win in, and it didn't make it there. But
the guy who knocked you out of that spot ended up beating me in the first round of the finals. He was the number 1 ranked person. He ended up basically having his choice.
Yeah.
So he's a very good player. Props to him. His name is Sam. Very good player, and he already had his invites to the RCQ. So I'm sure if we get our invites, we'll see him there. But
absolutely.
And it'll be a grudge match. It'll be a rematch. I'm excited for it. So, just out of curiosity, what did you end up playing in your sealed pool?
So I was kind of, I don't have my deck in front of me, but I was kind of playing a Sultai secret sauce. I had the green, the great worm. If you can pull the
Sure.
arena back up and look at it.
You got it.
My green was very good, and I had bushwhacks for days. So I just said, I have bushwhacks for days. My green is good. Let me just splash these good Dimir cards. And so I had Consuming Aberration and I had the Sultai Scavenger, and it just...
is it Great Worm R-O or is it U-R-M?
It's W-U-R-M, Great Worm. And it might be all one word. It is Quilled Great Worm.
Frilled Great
Quilled
Worm.
With a Q.
Oh, Quilled.
Yeah.
There it is.
So this card was bananas.
Mm.
I won...
After we talked bad about it.
I won pretty much every game that it landed.
I suppose it's better in sealed than it is in draft.
Yeah, sealed is very much about having your bombs. And
did you have any Llanowar elves?
Don't remember off the top of my head. I might have had one if I did, but I don't remember the list off the top of my head, honestly.
Got it. Yeah, this is the one that basically gets, whenever you deal combat damage, you put that many 1/1 counters on your creatures. Disgusting.
Yeah.
That would have been really good in my deck, actually.
Well, yeah, you definitely had the synergy for that.
Cool.
So yeah, we've talked about kind of how our experiences went. Let's at this point delve into more about what folks can do to prepare themselves with the tools they'll need to succeed at their limited RCQ.
Absolutely.
So the first thing that I would say that is important for me is knowing the format. And what that really means is, A, playing a lot of games when the format comes out and learning the interactions, but it also means studying the spoiler, learning and knowing kind of almost instinctually what is the removal, how does it stack up versus the creatures that are in the format, what is the fixing, how can you splash or play multicolor to support playing your best cards.
Just as a aside, I distinctly remember in 2 of my matchups, I called exactly what my opponent had in their hand as they were going to play it because of the situation that they were playing against and how they actually were playing the game. I called a Blasphemous Edict against one of my opponents, and so I was able to play around it, and I was able to see that they had mana open from the beginning to play around a stab or try to play around it as much as you. Sometimes there's nothing you can do about it, but if you can kind of be aware of those tricks and those things that we talk about on this podcast, it makes your life a lot easier.
Right. If you're playing an opponent who's playing Dimir, or they're playing Orzhov, they're playing blue-black, or they're playing white-black, and they leave 1 black up, you have to imagine that something you control is getting stabbed at some point before the end of your turn. You have to prepare for that. Going into combat, making all your decisions, somebody's getting stabbed if there's a black mana open. So
somebody's going to get stabbed, and
somebody's going to get stabbed tonight. So be ready for that, because it'll get you.
It's probably going to be a goblin.
Yeah.
So yeah, sorry, continue.
So, there's your fixing. I want to impress on people that sealed is more than just about opening bombs. Bombs are really important. They do help you. They're nice to have. Like, I had the Great Worm. It was a great worm. It carried me so hard because I was being greedy and playing 3 colors. But I was just trying to play the deck that had the highest ceiling possible. And what sealed is really about, it's about a juggling act, a balancing act between consistency versus raw power. And as you talked about with your deck, you opted for a little bit more consistency.
That's right. Yeah. So I knew my creatures, the quality of them in white was better, like the quality of the creatures. And, but I didn't have that many of them. Like, I didn't have that many creatures to trigger the Sky Knight cat creature that would grow every time you play a creature. So my game plan, like, the Sky Knight dies to 1 removal spell, like whether it's a Bake in the Pie or a Stab if they have it, or Witness Protection in the Moon, blah, 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 blah. There's a million things that could basically remove that creature. And I don't think it was going to be impactful enough for me to build around it.
Okay.
And so moving to Zimone comes down on turn 4, and that is usually a little bit later in the game. Some stuff has usually happened, some combat has usually happened, somebody's taken the advantage. One thing you have to remember is some players usually the aggressor and someone is usually the defender. And so if you're playing a more defensive style deck where you're just trying to get to the cards that will win you the game, the Zimones, the Tatiovas, the overruns, your job is to just kind of play as defensively as you can until you get to those cards and try to get your opponent to blink first.
Gavin, there's a really classic article that I would recommend that every Magic player goes and reads. It's by Mike Flores. It's called "Who is the Beatdown?" So we'll try and find a copy of that online and post it up. I believe it was from the dojo back in the day. So hopefully we can find an archived copy of that to link to.
I mean, it really just comes down to, like, not everybody's going to get a great pool. The person that was sitting across from me in the RCQ also got to the top 8. They opened an insane pool, Paul. I'm talking everything you could possibly ever want from this set.
Dazzling Angels for days.
Well, it wasn't even just Dazzling Angels. It was, 2 copies of Strix Lookout and the 3-mana 4/3 Spinner of Souls with, reach and basically finds you creatures. 2 Mischievous Mystics, a Celestial Armor, Tatiova, a Zimone. Like they had everything. They had everything you could possibly want in a deck, and they very easily cruised to the top 8. Bombs and really good opens can definitely carry you if you're, open them. But if you don't open them, that's how you really can test your mettle and see, how you play, how you respond to that kind of adversity. Certainly, I had a good pool. It wasn't a bad pool, but you really do make your mark when you play the games.
And this also leads into kind of our next bullet point, which is, what is your sideboard plan?
Absolutely.
Say you have kind of a weak pool, or you're playing your main deck that you've decided to start with is all of the bombs that you have, and it's kind of like a 3-color slop pile, kind of like what I played.
Yeah.
You have in your sideboard a 10 2-drop deck that when you're playing against somebody else who's slower and just as dirtily, but their bombs are better than yours, can you sideboard into the 10 2-drop deck and just curve out and kill them before their cards are relevant?
That's right. So one thing I want to mention about that is one thing that I did sideboard in a lot was the Imprison in the Moon, and also, depending on the matchup, Broken Wings. I also had a Cathar Commando in my sideboard that I could use against any deck that had a bunch of artifacts or was going for Banishing Lights or any other type of sort of non-hard removal based effect. Knowing the cards that are in your sideboard that are good against certain matchups really did benefit me a lot. Bringing those in, they were relevant 9 times out of 10. The thing with Limited is you're building a 40-card deck, so every card matters. And when you start with 7 cards, you only have, unless you take a mulligan, you only have 33 cards left in your deck when you start the game. So you are basically 1 in 33, 1 in 32, 1 in 31, and then you start getting into the percentages of like 1 in 20. 1 in 19, 1 in 18, 1 in 17. So as the game goes on, you are more and more likely to draw those impactful cards than in any other format for sideboarding. Like if you're playing standard and you have a 60-card deck and you side in 2 cards, that is a fractional change. Yes, it can matter. Certainly you can still draw those cards and they can have an impact. But because 40 cards is significant, 20% less than 60, or 33% less than 60, you're basically saying, this card is going to come in and have a big impact on the game.
Yeah, exactly.
What are your favorite sideboard cards from the set? For me, Broken Wings, obviously, that is so good against any removal that's not put in the graveyard. If it's removal that's like turn it into a land or turn it into a business person, with why am I blanking on the name of the card?
Witness protection.
Witness protection. Legitimate business person.
Yeah. Broken Wings is definitely the card that I most consider like your classic sideboard card. It's your classic situational. Well, they have this thing with flying or whatever that I have to deal with. I feel like for me, when it comes to sideboarding, at least in Foundations, most of the time if I'm sideboarding something, it's because I have a problem with my deck and I need to take a problem card out of my deck versus the fact that I need to bring in a good card. Oftentimes it's I need to lower my curve because yes, these 4 and 5 drops are great, but I know my opponent is Boros aggro, their pool is insane, and they will kill me by turn 4 or 5 if I don't have answers.
If I don't put that campus guide in over the 4-drop.
Exactly, 100%. So it's very much being able to identify the cards that are not helping you advance your game plan as it stacks up versus whoever you're playing with. And that's 100% contextual. And so it's just look at what you're trying to do, look at what your opponent is trying to do, and then say to yourself, take a breath after your game. It's a bummer when you lose and you're feeling salty and you just want to shuffle up your cards, slam them on the table, and go to the next game. It's important to not do that and take a breath and say, I lost. How did I lose? What in my big wad of cards that I thought was just chaff, what can I find that's going to plug a hole in my game plan that's going to help me get there?
I have to say thank you to Paul, because in the first round, I actually went to turns. So, as everybody knows, there's 5 turns after the time limit has expired. And if you go to turns and you get to turn 5 and nobody has won the game, it ends in a draw, essentially, unless somebody has won more games than the other person. That being said, you said something really great to me, because I was the last person. I was on turn 3 or turn 2. In this, basically, if you draw in round 1, it's not great because you are already basically, it's not a loss, but it's kind of the equivalent of a loss. You'll get paired down and stuff. So it's really important that you win your first round. And you just said, hey, you're shaking, take a deep breath, look at the board. Everybody in the whole store was watching us. It was the RCQ, 41 people were there. It was like being at the main table at the main event, number 1. And obviously it's my first one, and I took the longest amount of time putting my deck together out of everybody. And I was in the final game 3, turn 5, and I was able to calculate pretty much exactly lethal with what I had on the board. And I'm so thankful for you, Paul, for coming over and just putting your hand on my shoulder and just saying, hey, take a breath. Because that's what you got to do. You can get caught up in the moment and say, maybe I am overthinking this, or I'm not thinking this through enough. And you make one mistake, and then there's the ball game. So
absolutely,
Magic is a very, very tricky game. And so taking a breath and letting it all go is important.
And this is one thing that I kind of want to bring up when we talk about an RCQ is the format. So you're playing a full Swiss event. It can be a long day. With 41 players, we had 6 rounds. You get a few more players than that, you start to talk about having a 7-round day. Plus, you make top 8, you're looking at potentially 3 more rounds after that. You're looking at a very long day. I calculated,
if you're playing in an RCQ like this, the maximum amount of games you could possibly play during the day is 27. 27 games of Magic. If you take the 3, if you go to game 3 each time, multiply by the
number of rounds
that you have, number of rounds, like 27 games of Magic in a day.
It can be a lot. That's a lot of decisions. That's a lot of brain fatigue there.
It is. It really is. I'm actually going to calculate how many games I actually did play.
So that actually leads me to a bullet point that I want to talk about now, because it's really important. The day is going to be long. Prepare accordingly. For me, what preparing accordingly means is eating a good dinner the night before, getting actual sleep and not grinding arena drafts the night before, making sure that when you show up, you have as much of yourself together and collected as possible.
I felt like an athlete almost with my headphones in, like putting them over my head. Like I felt like somebody on the Patriots or another sports team. They were like walking out. They had like their pump up music in,
Yeah.
and you get into the zone.
Yeah, you got to have that. You got to have something that keeps you centered and calm and focused, because it is going to be a long day. You need to be ready for that,
Snacks.
For me, snacks are the be all end all. I've got my backpack's got 2 pockets, one on each side, and if I don't have a drink with me, I'm buying a drink at the event, and my 2 pockets are just loaded with snacks, and I'm just eating all day, every moment between rounds. If my opponent's taking a long time to sideboard, whatever, I'm there eating snacks. I don't want to get to round 5 or round 6 and be playing for my life and have my brain just shut off. I don't want to all of a sudden F6 in the middle of everything when I need to still be present in the game. Right. I don't want to check out.
It's definitely a grind, and I went into it thinking it was going to be a 3 or 4 possibly round event, and that I would be done by about, just after lunchtime. And when they said 6 rounds of Swiss, I was like, uh-oh, I'm glad I ate breakfast before I left.
Yeah, exactly.
Speaking of the actual event itself, I mean, can't say enough about the judges. They did a fantastic job of running the event itself. They were very clear and concise with their directions. They were very swift and great with their rulings. They were very proactive, and they made sure that everybody felt welcomed and safe. And it's exactly how you would want an event of that type to go. So props to the judges who ran this event. They're also doing, 10 hours of nonstop Magic, and they have to adjudicate all of the matches, not just the ones that you are participating in. So very much respect to those judges and to everybody who put on the event.
We can't thank judges enough. Judges do not get enough credit. So if you have an awesome local judge in your area, please thank them for what they do.
Thank them, yeah.
They don't have to be there. They could be in the event themselves playing. They could be playing Commander. They could be at home playing Arena. The fact that they're there, making sure that an event runs smoothly and goes well, and that everyone who's involved has a good time. I can't understate how important that is. And so big shout out to all the judges. Shout out Adam and Ian in particular, who judged at our event. I forget the third judge's name. I apologize. I'm terrible with names. So I'm shouting out the friends. Shouting out the friends that I know, and I'll learn your name eventually. Please remind me next time I see you.
Absolutely. So let's talk about some of the differences between like a regular sealed event and this RCQ, because going into it, I had no idea that this was going to be recorded and that you had to start each round with the same deck that you built in your original sealed pool.
So when you play a pre-release, for example, you're doing what's called continuous construction. You can make changes to your deck, not only between sideboards, but between rounds, and you can keep it however you want it. At an RCQ, it's what we call competitive rules enforcement level, which is a higher tier of standard than what you would normally play at like Friday Night Magic, for example. So what that means is every round you need to return your deck to its original configuration that you built during deck building for the start of each new match. That's
one thing that is also important to note is that you verify you're paired in 2s, and you verify the pool that your opponent opened. So you record every single card that was opened within this pool. So you get an idea of, well, what they're going to be running maybe, but you also have a documented, recorded allotment of every card that is in your pool to prevent cheating, of course. But it's also one of those things where you need to make sure that every I is dotted, every T is crossed, and the time that you have to build can't be understated as to how stressful that is.
Yeah, the registration and the deck building procedure is really intimidating if it's the first time that you've done it. So
I was definitely intimidated.
I do recommend practicing it a little bit. The registration especially bogs certain players down. It's really important that if you don't have a judge there explaining how they want it done, it's really important that you have an idea how to do it yourself, because they're going to give you a sheet of paper that has every Magic card in Foundations or whatever the given format that you're playing on it. And you have to take that, open up your pool, sort your pool, ideally alphabetically, or in the case of foundations, by collector number, and then run through and check off all the cards that are in the pool, and then put it and keep it in that order so you can hand it to the other person who's going to verify it and then hand it back to you. And you do all of that in about 20 minutes, and then you still have to build your deck. And oh, by the way, you only have 30 minutes to build your deck.
Yeah. And put all your lands in and adjust for any fixing and think of any contingency plans. And in my case, make a last minute pivot. I had probably 2 or 3 different deck configurations that I was happy with and ended up going with the green-blue configuration in the end because I wanted to play those bombs. But it was hard. It was really hard to make those decisions quickly, and it was very hard. You couldn't do it the normal way that you would do it at a pre-release or at a Friday Night Magic or even with your friends. You know, one thing you can try to do to prepare for this is if you're doing either a sealed league or draft league or something, why don't you set a timer the next time you do this and just see how long it actually takes you to build a deck in draft and in sealed. This is just going to give you a baseline for how long it usually takes you to sort through the cards, build your deck, and come up with a configuration that you're happy with. Because again, in the RCQ, you have to revert back to your original deck each time. So making it with flexibility in mind is paramount. Got to be good against a lot of different decks.
But that's also where your sideboarding comes in. And
right.
Your deck list, I always recommend everybody, when they've built their deck and they've registered what they're going to play, take a picture of it.
Take a picture. I took a picture of mine.
Either lay out all the cards and take a picture of all the cards laid out, or take a picture of the deck list sheet itself before you turn it in, so that you can easily return to your configuration of cards.
One other small tidbit or helpful thing that I found very helpful and probably saved me round 1 is having lands either pre-sleeved with you or already, in a case ready for you to go. I know that the stores do provide land stations, and there's certainly, nothing wrong with going and getting lands from the land station if you build your pool very quickly. But because I was making that last minute pivot and because I was so behind on time, I had like literally 3 minutes to put lands in my deck and sleeve it up. And that wasn't enough time, but because I had my lands with me in my bag instead of, having to go up and grab lands, that saved me the extra 30 seconds that maybe I wouldn't have had otherwise.
Yeah, that's definitely something that people can do. I'm always on the side of, well, I'm going to forget my basic lands at home for whatever reason, something's going to happen. So I just always plan on using whatever the store provides. And then please, everybody, you're playing in this event, you want to play in more events like this, return your lands to the land station at the end of the event so they can run more events like this.
Absolutely. I mean, everybody just assumes that there's just a million basic lands out there, and there are, but they're not infinite.
I played a Duskmorn sealed RCQ event at a shop, and they almost didn't have enough swamps for everyone in the room who needed them. There was some scraping and scrabbling involved to have enough swamps for players to play their decks in the event. So
these are things you don't really think about when you're doing a regular sealed event or doing a draft, but they do come into play here in this competitive event because that's the difference. It's the difference between the casual play and the more strict rules. Are there any gameplay practices that you would say help in RCQs or in competitive Magic in general?
For me, gameplay habits are really important. I really like to keep life totals with pen and paper. Theoretically, that's what they want you to do at a competitive level. You're not putting dice down to represent your life total. No spin downs. Players are allowed to use those electronic dummy pads to write life totals on. I prefer to use old school pen and paper and write it out. And then I like to take notes while I'm playing if I have the time.
I like to write the big pieces of removal that I saw in round 1. That actually helped me a lot in round 2, and things to kind of play around or to remember. Even the act of writing it down, like say they have a bake in the pie or a stab. Just having it written it down helps me remember a little bit more that they have that capability and that I should be looking for it in the next round.
Right.
You have complete autonomy to write this stuff down, as long as you're not, writing something that they don't have in there, or,
It's important to distinguish that you can use notes only during the match in which you're playing. You're not allowed to use outside notes from outside the current match that you're in.
That's right.
You can't scout your opponent at an earlier round and write down the contents of their deck list and then go refer to that in the middle of the match or anything.
That's cheating. Don't do that.
So don't do that, please. But do take the time, if your opponent stabs your guy or they joust through something, write down that they have those. If they reveal a card to you at any point, they micromancer for something and get out their 1 mana value stab or whatever, write it down that you saw that, because if they don't play it immediately, turns can go by.
Yeah.
Don't autopilot and forget that they've been sitting on an Eaten Alive that they found 10 turns ago with their micromancer when the game bogs down.
It's so hard because Arena reveals it, it turns it around and reveals it as if they're playing with it revealed to you. But in real life,
it keeps that reminder there, and that's not going to happen in real life in paper.
That's right. Arena kind of
holds your hand.
Gives you a crush. It gives you a crutch because it doesn't miss triggers, and it shows you the cards that have been revealed. And those are 2 huge elements of the game. I missed a treasure trigger in my round of 8 game, and so that's on me. I missed the trigger, and so I wasn't able to produce that mana, which would have definitely helped in the game.
Right.
My brain was fried at that time, so I really, I hadn't prepared enough. If I had listened to this podcast and had eaten some snacks along the way, maybe my brain would have remembered. But it's one of those things where, you're playing for a very, very long time, so you have to remember your triggers. You have to give everything the way that it's supposed to, and Arena gives you a lot of crutches. It's much, much better to prepare for an RCQ in person using paper magic.
Absolutely.
Because that's what it is.
Yeah. So, Gavin, as we start to head out from here, what is the biggest piece of this puzzle for you that you're going to be working on for your next RCQ? What's the thing that you are going to tackle?
So I guess the expectations can be a little bit higher next time. I'm going to hopefully expect to make the top 8. Whether that happens or not, it remains to be seen. But knowing what is expected of you and doing it for the first time kind of opened my eyes to, who you're playing against and how you are able to play against this wide swath of opponents. There are some really, really good players out there. There are some really, really good players out there who play more than me, who play, professionally or play semi-professionally or stream or, do these things. And they're out there and they play in these tournaments, and you have to be ready for that. You really do have to be ready for that. And you have to go in with a kind of, I don't want to say cutthroat or brutal mentality, but you have to change your mindset for these events because your opponents are not going to take it easy on you. This is not a casual event. This is not something that people are really doing. They're doing it for fun. It is very fun. I enjoyed myself tremendously, but they want to win. People want to win, and they will play as best as they can to do so. So one thing I will go into it next time with is, if somebody is playing this event, they're doing it very seriously, and you should take everything very seriously, and you have to stay switched on for the entire duration of the event, and don't switch it off. Don't take anything for granted, because you could miss a treasure trigger and then be unable to hold up a counterspell and yada, yada, yada. And then next thing you know, you're out of it. So, keep your wits about you, take it seriously, prepare, hydrate, eat some food, and have some fun. I mean, I had a blast. Not just because I got top 8. I mean, I'm sure you had a blast too, even though you didn't make top 8.
My deck deck was very fun. I had a pool that was so good that I wasn't exactly smart enough to find it in the time allotted. I built what I thought was the best. So I was playing Golgari black-green, splashing blue, so that I could play just a couple of key cards. But there was a 4-color soup monstrosity that would have allowed me to play all my bombs in there if I'd
Mhm.
had more than the 30 minutes. So
Well,
I played what I thought was the best, and I enjoyed playing every minute of it that I was playing.
if you practice more, how do you
Exactly.
practice? Is right. I mean, you listen to these podcasts, you go to the events. I think the biggest takeaway for me is go to one of these events and try it for yourself, because you can't really know what it's like until you do it. And it's expensive. It's an expensive, pretty much the most expensive event that Magic the Gathering or stores run typically, but it's worth it. It
Absolutely.
really is worth it.
Absolutely.
Even if you 0-3, even if you 0-2, 0-3, drop, whatever, it's still worth it.
The experience is definitely worth it. It's going to get you accustomed to playing Magic at a higher level,
Yeah.
And that's exciting. It's exciting.
It is exciting.
It's exciting to play Magic in general. It's
Mhm.
even more exciting to play Magic when you're chasing something, when it gives you a drive to perform better than you are sometimes. And
Absolutely.
that's why I like it, and that's why I enjoy it.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Well, thank you so much for listening to the podcast. Paul, do you have any closing thoughts?
I would just say play lots of Magic, build lots of sealed pools, enjoy it. I will continue harping that limited is the greatest way to play Magic. That's why people are here listening, because they love limited as well. So just play more limited, play more sealed. Don't think that, draft is just better than sealed, whatever. Sealed is its own format, and you need to prepare for it the same way you would prepare for draft or think about draft. It's just a little different.
Absolutely. I mean, there are some sealed players and players on Arena consistently are able to perform and get to these big events because they can build really good decks even out of the meagerest of pools. So keep your head up. Even if you don't go top 8 in your first one, I'm very lucky, and obviously it's a combination of luck and skill, but keep your head up and don't forget that Magic is a game, and please be respectful to your opponents and respectful to your judges. And we will see you guys on the next pod. If you want to follow us, we have a Blue Sky account, Pick One, Pack One Pod on Blue Sky. And you can find us on Instagram as well at Pick One. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, Gavin.
Thank you, Paul. Have a good one.
Cheers.
Bye.